Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Lunch and Learn session in our post-implementation phase of the Care Coordination Organizations. This is Kate Bishop. I'm the Director of Program Development and Implementation, and I'll be presenting today on the material for this session. So first, we're very glad to have a high level of participation today. We actually closed out the session with 1,000 participants scheduled. So we're really pleased that people are engaged in connecting to these info sessions. As I mentioned, we did a lot of the Lunch and Learn sessions during the period building up to the 7/1 go live date, really focused on all of the activities relative to getting people enrolled into the Health Home Care Management Service and the basic plan support service and CCOs, and educating people about those requirements and consents. And as you all know, that was a pretty intensive time period. We're now understanding, as you've been through the first 6 months, that there have been some things that have gone really smoothly with the transition, and there have been other areas where improvements might be needed in order to be sure that everyone's consistently implementing some of the new tools and the new approaches and understanding some of the changes that have occurred as a result of our transition into the new life plan format and the staff action plans. So the intention of the next series of sessions for Lunch and Learn is really focused on helping make sure that the system is educated around all of the areas that are most important in the implementation phase for CCOs, and also making sure that we as a state are supporting you all with consistent information, with information relative to the critical areas that are emerging as we are in the process of implementation. So we think these sessions will be real effective in sharing information. We'll be recording them so that they will be available as resources to people who participated, as well as those people who were unable to make the call today and will be able to participate and listen to the information at a time that's more convenient for them. So our first session today is on care coordination, organization, and provider collaboration on the life plan. We know there have been a lot of challenges in the implementation of the new life plan, and the opportunity to discuss what to expect during the course of life planning processes is really the focus of today's presentation. In a few weeks, February 13th, we will be doing the quality of the life plan, a presentation on what we should expect to see in the development of a quality life plan and some of the key issue areas that we've been hearing about and seeing in the development of those life plans to help, again, consistently educate the system and support the work that all the CCOs are doing to really develop quality life plans for people receiving supports and services. In lieu of the info sessions on these next couple dates, we encourage attendance on February 27th, an overview of services for Willowbrook class members. That's a standing presentation, and that is an area that we know people have a focus on. Anyone who's serving a member of the Willowbrook class should make sure that they're participating in any of the trainings relative to Willowbrook class members. And then on March 13th is our normal quarterly Care Managers Conference, and that will also have information relative to the implementation of life plans and other relevant information for care managers as we move forward. So, we look forward to ongoing work with you all in collaboration on the activities for implementing new supports and new systems around the supports and services people receive within our system. So again, today's focus is on collaboration and the life plan development. And just want to take a minute to review some of the expectations around life plan completion. And you can see in this cycle that's identified here in the PowerPoint slide has been used in the Connect the Dots presentation, has been used in the Staff Action Plan training presentation, and it's really a key element to how supports and services should be developed and planning around those supports and services should be documented, and who should be involved in the process flow for how supports and services need to be developed and implemented that align with the person's desired outcomes and their needs around their health and safety needs. So again, it's a collaborative process. The life plan development is a collaborative process. It includes people who are, the person who's receiving services should be the driver and the director to the degree possible at all times, with the support of a planning team or circle of support to be able to identify the things that are most important to that individual. It's critical that all the members of the care planning team are included, engaged, and working together towards the ultimate outcome of a comprehensive person-centered service plan that meets the needs and overarching safeguards and life goals of the person. So what we've been hearing and seeing is that a lot of the new technology and new terminology and some of the specificity that is emerging from the use of the IAM tool for care planning and assessment purposes and the life plan development, which is really, those are tools designed to support a person-centered process. They don't replace the person-centered process, and they should be used in a way that really create efficiencies and facilitate the implementation of those person-centered practices. But what we're hearing from some is that we're hearing that the IT at times seems to be driving the outcomes as opposed to the person-centered planning process. So we want to make sure that we're reinforcing today that the ultimate goal of the planning process is to develop a comprehensive plan for the person that aligns with what they want most in their life, so you need to listen and know what that is, that incorporates consistently safeguards around the needs that the person has, and those should flow from the use of assessment tools such as the CAS, the DDP2, and the IAM, and then that the staff action plans that are needed for habilitative services align directly with the life plan so that it's what people want from their services that are built into the habilitative service that somebody receives. And then the service is delivered, and the ongoing planning and review process is about, is this working for the person? Is the plan of support that's been developed and implemented and the service that's been implemented working for the person, and does it need to continue, be revised, evaluate? And that's the normal flow of planning processes that you all are familiar with. What's different in today's world is that we are requiring the new IT systems to house some of those things. But again, the goal is not to have the IT system driving the development of the plans, but to be a support to the person-centered practice. We're going to talk more in this presentation today about how we would see that and how you all can support your processes to achieve person-centered practices in your delivery of supports and service development. So one of the critical changes that is currently in place is there have been some changes to the dates around when we would expect life plans and therefore staff action plans to be completed. So we recognize that the initial transition, as I mentioned, had some challenges. A lot of those challenges were IT-related challenges, where there were some pieces that were expected to work together smoothly, where those things did not work together smoothly. So we've spent a lot of time in the last couple months. CCOs have worked with vendors. We've been working to support those efforts, and we've done a lot of education around how to manage some of the challenges that have emerged during this transition period. We've also recognized that given some of those implementation challenges, we needed to provide some relief for the transition period. So it's been extended by 6 months with some specific points in time for different groups of people. But the overall expectation is that by December 31st of 2019, so at the end of this year, all individuals will have the life plan, which means that since people have time after that for the new transition to staff action plans, that by March 1st, 2020, all individuals receiving supports and services will have a staff action plan for their rehabilitative services. Now, that doesn't mean that you would want to put off the development of a life plan. In fact, we encourage you to make this transition to the new life plan model and the use of the IT supports as soon as possible, because that will ensure that there's consistency of services, that the system is moving in the direction that it needs to move in, that you're creating the framework for the future, and that, remember, those IT systems, even though right now they're still feeling new and challenging, those IT systems over time, and as they get stronger and everyone gets more used to them, will actually support you all in your activities around communication and around consistency of definition for service development and planning and sharing of information that's critical to the health and safety of individuals receiving supports and services. I also want to clarify that anyone new to services, so if someone's coming in and has not had an ISP in the past, they would have a life plan in the first instance, just as they've always been expected to do. With these timeline extensions, that does not change. So what is the flow between the staff action plan and the life plan? The life plan is driven by the person who's receiving support, and you've heard me say this a couple times. You'll probably hear it a couple more times. It's not the technology that drives the development of the life plan, it's the person. The technology is a support to have the person's voice heard in a consistent way and to help facilitate the development of a comprehensive and consistent plan of support for the person. The care manager is the facilitator or coordinator of the process. So you're really in the role of facilitating what the person and the people who know the person best and the circle of support is identifying about what is most important to that person from the services that they're receiving. The life plan is the overarching and active document defining the person's goals and valued outcomes, as well as the needed safeguards. And this is critical, and it is a change in some ways, but I know we've reinforced this message in the Connect the Dots training and the Staff Action Plan training, so we're going to reinforce it again here today. The critical shift is that the planning and the approach to developing a comprehensive life plan is about identifying what is most important to the person from their system of support in a way that is consistent and comprehensive, and getting away from some of the program-specific plans that really were siloed and didn't necessarily talk to each other. So by having an IT system that houses the life plan with the support system and the service providers and the person and their family and other people who support them in their decision-making, working together to do a comprehensive plan results in consistency of practice around the areas that are most desired from the person and the needed safeguards. And I'm going to use an example here because we've used them in the past, and I just want to reiterate the point. There have been many instances over time where safeguards that might be developed in a residential setting because they're familiar with what's happening with the person don't get communicated effectively to the day program or the SEMP provider of service or another provider of service. And in those instances, something gets missed and there's a negative outcome for the person. It could be a change in supervision, it could be a change in diet, it could be a change in nursing oversight for skin integrity issues, it could be a whole host of things. But having one location for the person's goals and valued outcomes, as well as their safeguards, that's consistently communicated and shared across providers will facilitate improved quality outcomes, and that's the goal of all of this systems change. It's a team process to arrive at an accurate and comprehensive plan that's the person's blueprint. So the person's blueprint is, this is what I want from my services. This is what I want in my life to support those person-centered processes, that support the person-centered outcomes that are most important to that person. So the staff action plans are derived from the life plan. They more closely align with the life plan than what people are familiar with the old habilitation plans and ISPs. So the staff action plan really stems directly from the life plan, where in that planning process, you're identifying what's important to the person and what is needed from the person to assign to providers as provider-assigned goals to implement those activities that are going to support the needs and the desires of the person receiving support. The staff action plan fills in details beyond what's identified in the life plan so that it can more specifically identify the how. How will the goals and action items be implemented in a way that's meant to achieve the ultimate goals and safeguards that the person has in their life plan? So those two pieces of the puzzle work so closely together. And then in providing that further detail, the staff action plan outlines service delivery strategies. How will the skill acquisition or retention be implemented? What are the staff supports needed? What exploration of new experience might help the person meet the goals that they have in their life plan? So for what this, and those details identify what the staff must do and how they will do it. So the staff who is delivering those services, the habilitation services, will have that defined. I'm going to mention here as well, because it came up in a question that happened just today, and I may repeat this after. Respite services have come into question for some of the people receiving services and where those needs of the provider are identified. So we would expect to see for respite provider, which is not a habilitation service, so it doesn't have a formal staff action plan, but the respite provider must be aware of the safeguards that are identified in the life plan and must ensure as a foundation to any service that the person is receiving the safeguards necessary to keep them healthy and safe and to meet their ongoing needs as any support service is provided. Now, respite is a service that is a relief service to the family. It's not a service directly provided to the person receiving services, but the safeguards that are identified in the life plan must be implemented in the course of delivery of the respite service. So life plan participation and agreement by the providers responsible for implementing the plan is a key requirement. So we know that during this period of time in transition, well, there are new things emerging and new terminology and different ways that things are documented and memorialized, that there's been a lot of stress around what does the life plan say, how does that comport with the staff action plan, what do I need to expect, how can I make sure that I'm not as a provider creating a liability for my agency, my service, by not having the right pieces in place in the plans that are required for the delivery of supports and services and the billing for those services that are provided. So that is a real issue, and we are working, that's why this is the first session that we're doing, is focused on this collaboration, because we need to all work together as a system. You all, your supervisors, your leadership, us at OPWDD providing support and education, the providers of service listening, learning, understanding, and being responsive to some of these changes. And so a lot of the focus as far as managing this transition is about collaborating, working together, and identifying how to resolve any issues that might emerge. So a final life plan requires the agreement of the person and the major service providers that must implement the life plan, or it can't be considered final. So that's just the normal course of developing plans, You can't develop a plan and then say, you have to do this, and the provider is saying, that's not something that we have the capability of delivering. In instances where there is a disagreement, there needs to be a resolution to that disagreement and collaboration around how to proceed. This is even more important now than previously because the life plan contains specificity about what providers are expected to deliver with the development of services and support. For example, the provider-assigned goals, their frequency and time frame. That is the starting point for the development of a staff action plan. So during the life planning meeting, there should be discussion around all of these kinds of things, and consensus should be sought and obtained during the course of the planning meeting. Ideally, the provider leads that life planning meeting with an understanding of what those provider-assigned goals are so that they can begin working on their staff action plan. They shouldn't have to wait a long period of time or get something different when the life plan is finalized than what was discussed during the course of that meeting, because that's where you come to a consensus and agreement around what the person wants from their supports and services and what can be delivered through the provision of supports and services. It's also where you might identify that someone wants a change in their supports and services, and that is something that can be worked on after the life planning meeting, maybe by a change in what the particular provider is providing, or in looking for a different provider if the person wants something different. That's nothing new. It's how you've always managed the development of supports and services in the ISP world as well. What's different is that it's a much more defined element in the life plan, and it carries over to the development of the staff action plan. So person-centered processes are required. They're required consistent with what is listed in New York Code's Rules and Regulations, Part 636. The person-centered planning process includes the need to develop strategies that address conflicts or disagreements in the person-centered planning process. It should include clear conflict of interest guidelines for individuals and communicating such strategies to the individual who's receiving services as appropriate. So this was in place prior to the transition to CCOs and continues to be in place now. Where there is disagreement, there needs to be processes to support how those conflicts of interest or the concerns that people have around the development of support strategies need to be resolved. So in order to achieve person-centered resolution in situations where there are conflicts or disagreements with the development and implementation of the life plan, the care manager and providers need to collaborate to find solutions with the care planning team and or through policies for resolution developed by the involved organization. So again, these are things that you're used to doing. Don't think that all of the skills and the activities that you undertook as a MSC go away as you're transitioning to a care manager. I think what we've seen that's different is including those provider-assigned goals in the life plan and the development of safeguards during the life planning process that carry over as overarching guidance to the development of the staff action plan is what's different in the system. It shouldn't be different conceptually, but it feels different because of the specificity in the documents that are created. So I just encourage you to continue to work through your normal processes to resolve situations of this nature and to make sure that there's a good discussion around it and to look for solutions. So collaboration to reach a person-centered resolution is really about identifying the care planning team members and having discussions about what they know about the person and what the person wants, how they are discussing together what can be achieved in the supports and services that they are delivering, and working to define those in a realistic way. We need supervisors to be a part of that, and structures developed within the CCO supervision chain and leadership roles to make sure that that care planning team members and the collaboration that's expected is supported. Because We know that there's going to be some tensions at times between the service providers who are saying, we can't possibly do that, or who say, we really think the person needs this as a safeguard as opposed to what's being developed in the course of the planning process or the use of the IEM tool. And we know that there are going to be times when there are tensions and disagreements. So there needs to be structures in the organization for resolving those issues. And you as care managers and care manager supervisors who are part of this training today and part of the ongoing delivery of services need to think about, how do I make sure that I understand and am knowledgeable enough about how these systems work so that I can help facilitate those solutions during the planning meetings? How do I know as a supervisor that I'm supporting my staff to feel empowered to manage those situations? When does someone come through their supervisory chain and ask for help and work to get resolution on things? These are things that all should be developed as far as training and the compliance activities of the CCO agency and council to really define what the structures are for helping to support this process, because we know there are going to be times, as there have always been, where resolution needs to be obtained. So some life plan collaboration expectations, just some quality checkpoints for consideration. So when you're developing a life plan and you're kind of looking at what's coming through the life planning process, these are things to pay attention to as you look at the quality checkpoints for the development of a life plan. Make sure that the person is included in the life plan process and is the driver to the extent that he or she desires to be. Make sure that all major providers that must implement the life plan are included in the life plan meetings and processes. Be sure that the person and all major service providers understand and agree to what is being assigned to them prior to the end of the life planning meeting, including the frequency, how often the provider assigned goals will be delivered. That seems to be one area where there's a lot of sticking points, and it's an area where there may need to be some negotiation. And I'll just use a quick example here. You may have someone who wants to, when maybe their personal outcome measure area that they're most focused on and has as their highest priority is ongoing activity in the community and building community relationships. And that's the area that they're most interested in. And what they say in their planning process is, I want to participate every day, Monday, every day of the week, Sunday through Saturday, in an activity in the community, and I want support from my residential provider to deliver that. And the residential provider, who's serving a number of people in a certified residential setting, is saying, wow, we really want to support the person to do this, but a frequency of 7 days a week is really more than what's reasonable for us to be able to achieve. And so we need to look at other ways in our collaborative planning process to think about how do we help the person have these life goals met, but the residential support staff needs to be able to support everyone that they're supporting in that setting. So how do we work together to develop what the person wants? That could include potentially involving other natural supports or volunteers who can help facilitate supports to a person to engage in a more community-based relationship building activity. It could be supporting the person through some kind of technology to help the person be more independent in some of those activities, so it becomes their own personal goal to achieve those areas that are most important to them in life. So there are other ways to resolve some of those issues and still look at the person who's receiving supports and services and come to an understanding and agreement about what can be delivered through the paid support system that the person has and what can be explored through other avenues to help the person meet their own individual person-centered goals. So life plan collaboration expectations, some quality checkpoints for the care manager again. Think about the number of goals and supports in sections 2 and 3, and make sure that they make sense in light of the supports and services that will be delivered. Make sure that there are not too many or too few goals or supports. And one of the examples we received in I think this was an early life plan that was developed using the new technology and support tools. was a plan that had 40 goals to be assigned to providers. Well, that's kind of hitting the too many aspect of a life plan development. So during the course of the planning meeting, if the use of the tools to develop the life plan brings you to a point where there's so many different goals or supports that are identified in the course of that planning process that it's unachievable, you need to really prioritize and discuss what's most important to the person and make reasoned judgments about what is appropriate and can be delivered. On the other hand, we've heard that there are some times when there are too few goals that are identified in the course of the planning process. And then there needs to be a discussion with the provider about the service and what is the service really trying to help the person achieve in their life, and what are the goals that need to be implemented to really make sure that the person actually needs that service. If you can't identify an area that is a goal or support that the service is going to deliver for the person to help them achieve either their personal outcomes or their safeguard needs, then what is there a need for that service really kind of comes into question during the planning process. So it's important that the life plan comprehensively and accurately address the person's needs, safeguards, and meaningful goals and outcomes. The life plan helps to establish whether there is a need for the services that are authorized in Section 4. And the development of the life plan also identifies for people who are new to services why those services should be authorized through the regional office for the ongoing delivery of a service that the person is asking for. So, you know, the life plan is able to identify some of the specific areas of interest for the person and how services are going to be able to achieve that, as well as the safeguard needs that a person has and how the services and supports will help that person achieve those safeguards. So now we're going to go through some do's and don'ts that, you know, we're highlighting here because they're things that have come through, questions that have emerged from various activities, from the question and answer sessions that we've had after some of the other trainings that we've done, from care managers directly, from CCOs directly. So we'll go through some of these things that are more typically identified in the course of some of the planning challenges. So do, first, always problem solve and try to resolve the issues when the provider or another member of the circle of support indicates that the life plan isn't accurate or reflective of the person's goals or needs. So one of the things that we've heard is that there have been some feedback that because you've gone through, and I'm speaking to you as care managers, gone through the use of the IEM tool and identified areas of support or interest from the person, and then when you get to the planning meeting, there's some difference of opinion as far as what's identified in the life plan in the safeguard area or the outcome areas that the person is interested in. Maybe the IEM was done at a point in time and identified something the person was interested in that day, and then at the life planning meeting the person says, you know, I've really come to realize I want something different from my supports and services. Everyone changes their thinking and focus at various points in time. So during the planning meeting and the finalization of the life plan, you need to update and create an accurate reflection of the person's goals and needs. So you shouldn't say, oh, that's been done, it's finalized, we can't change anything. So even if it's inaccurate, we can't change it, and that's what we've heard in some instances. And again, that would be an example of when technology is driving the process instead of strong person-centered practices. So at the end of the day, what needs to be in the life plan is an accurate reflection of the person and their needs, and you shouldn't say that because of technology we're unable to change that, because technology is a support to achieve a good comprehensive plan. It isn't it's a thing we're held hostage to in the development of a plan. So, so do problem solve and don't say we can't change anything. So the life plan agreement and IM assessment, the do's, again, more do's and don'ts for care managers. So do, work on the IM assessment prior to the life plan meeting to try to complete as much as possible from applicable sources. So that could mean a discussion, with the person or their family member or their staff support. It could mean a review of records, but you want to try to get some of that done. We've heard some individuals receiving supports and some of their families feeling like sitting down and doing everything all in one shot can be very lengthy and can be a difficult process for some people to stay engaged in. So there are things that can be done to help facilitate the completion of the IM tool to make it a bit easier for everyone involved. Do plan to review and amend the output of the IM assessment. So that's the goals, supports that result in Section 2 and 3 of the life plan with the person in the planning team during the life plan meeting. And then that should be edited and prioritized as needed. So again, this is back to the issue of accuracy. Having a review of that final IM tool and assessment and making sure that it's actively informing the life plan in a consistent and accurate way is what's going to help end up with a life plan that makes the most sense and truly is reflective of the person's goals. The IM assessment output is a starting point for the development of the life plan. We know that a lot of things can pour over, but say you have a person that you're working with who says yes to everything and wants supports and services in every single area of their life. That's when you need to take what comes out of that IM assessment, but then start to prioritize and identify what is the first thing and the most meaningful thing that's going to help the person have the supports in their life that are most meaningful to them. Because just like all of us, you can't do everything all at once all the time. If you have lots and lots of ambitious goals, you have to start prioritizing and working on things one at a time in order to be effective in getting those things completed. So what you don't do is start filling out the IM assessment in its entirety during the life planning meeting. So that's going to be a very, very lengthy life planning meeting. It's going to be too involved for the person receiving services as well as all of the participants in the life planning meeting. So it's not going to be a productive use of that time, and it's likely to have everyone get very frustrated. So having work done ahead of time and finalizing things during the course of the meeting is really the most effective way. And you also don't want to just accept and finalize a life plan without having review and amendment and prioritization of goals and supports from the IM assessment and agreement and acknowledgement from the providers responsible for implementing the plan. So as much as you can get agreement and discussion and ensure that providers are understanding and ready to deliver on the goals that are being identified, the goals and supports that are being identified in the life plan meeting process, it's going to make it much easier at the end of the day to finalize and get agreement and approval and acknowledgement on that life plan. Remember, because of the direct relationship between the provider-assigned goals and the development of staff action plans, those providers are going to be looking for information as quickly as possible so they can go back and start to develop their staff action plans in a meaningful way. They don't want to be surprised 2 or 3 weeks later with something that looks different than what was discussed during the course of that life planning meeting. So life plan agreement and IM assessment, the do's for care managers. Do edit the life plan to ensure that what populates the life plan from the IM assessment is accurate and relevant, and that the life plan is understandable by all that read it. Do request and invite the care planning team to participate and provide feedback on the development of the life plan. And do ensure that the appropriate provider representatives are the ones that agree to and acknowledge the life plan for finalization. And now this is some of the information that we want you to be aware of. It's focused on the providers, but we want you to know what education we're providing to providers so that you can be the facilitator and feel empowered to focus on some of these things as you operate and run life plan meetings. So bring to the attention of the care manager, remember this is from the provider perspective, that the life plan is not reflective of the person's needs and safeguards and goals. So in the same way that we're saying to you, let's make sure that we have good discussions and agreement and understand what we think is most meaningful and important to the person and what safeguard needs they have, that we're saying to the providers, if you think something's wrong, discuss it during the life plan meeting. Don't wait till later and then not agree with the plan. That's the opportunity to really look at this and have a good discussion and resolution where there might be differing opinions. Do work through needed changes with the person, care manager, and applicable circle of support. If working through the care manager doesn't help, go up the chain of command to resolve issues. Sometimes issues are up above your pay grade, so to speak. There are long-standing areas of concern that sometimes have gone with difficulty in getting resolutions over many, many years, and that may rear up again during the course of this life planning process. So where you need help, it's appropriate and reasonable to work through your support system, meaning your supervisor and their supervisor if needed, and even the leadership of the organization in some instances, to really come to a resolution on some of these challenging issues. We feel like the vast majority of things can be resolved through the normal course of life planning processes and discussion, as they have always been, but there are going to be some sticky situations that need to have more support to bring them to resolution. So we're also saying to providers, don't refuse to agree or sign the life plan due to concerns over whether a provider assigned goal should be listed as a goal or support. So that's one of the areas that we have heard about, and we're helping providers understand that either a goal or a support can be included in a staff action plan and appropriate to support the billing of their services. Don't threaten to discontinue services to the person over life plan disagreements. That's the last thing we want, is for families or individuals receiving services to feel like this process is threatening their ongoing delivery of services. So that's not a way to resolve a dispute. It's really got to be a collaborative approach and using your system of support to resolve issues. And again, this is direction for providers. Don't go directly to OPWDD with individual plan concerns, issues, without trying to work through them with the care manager and the CCO chain of command. So sometimes we get these really obscure questions that are coming into the mailbox or central office, and that's not really the way to resolve and build capacity as a system. In order to get everyone on the same page, we have to all recognize that we're going through a period of transition, that we're learning new things, that we're implementing new things that have different language and different approaches associated with them, and then work to resolve those on a case-by-case basis in a way that over time is going to build capacity overall for the care managers, for the service providers, for OPWGD, so that we're all learning, and then we can grow and learn together and increase capacity to the overall system in a way that really supports quality, which again is the ultimate outcome here. So life plan agreement, the do's and don'ts for providers. Again, this is focused on providers. If necessary, be as specific as possible and follow up in writing about the changes needed to the life plan and how they are related to accurately and comprehensively reflecting the person's needs, goals, and safeguards. One of the areas, and I think we'll have a session on this during our upcoming sessions, will be focused on supervision levels within the safeguard section, because that's a question that we've had a lot on with regard to life plan development. There's different language and there's different terminology, and the IAM tool may result in different levels of supervision than might be the defined policies in a particular agency. So we know that there's been some disconnects with regard to that. So where you're seeing things that are raising such significant concern that you're feeling like you can't agree to the plan, documenting that, sharing it, using the chain of command within, we're telling the providers to do this, within their own provider agency, within the CCOs, to make sure that there's a good understanding of what the problem is so that resolution can be sought. Because the only way to resolve things is to really understand where the problem is occurring. We don't want to expect or mandate the care manager to include in the life plan all the same goals or supports that were previously included in the person's habilitation plan, just to ensure that there's consistency for the convenience of billing that particular service that staff are aware of. That's one of the major reasons for quality improvement practices with regard to the development of the life plan, is to ensure that the habilitative supports aren't just about being able to document the delivery of a service, but to document that the service is actually helping the person achieve the outcomes that are most important to them. That's why we are requiring in life plans that there be at least 2 personal outcome measure areas of focus for the person receiving services, because the whole intention of making this transition is to support the person in a way that helps them achieve their person-centered outcomes. That's the goal here. So if you're getting a lot of pressure from service providers who say, we just need to use these same plans, we're going to put them in the new format, but it's the same goal that they've always had, and that's not consistent with what the person says they want through their personal outcome measure planning process, you should feel empowered to say, nope, that's not going to be in support of the personal outcome measure area that we're pursuing here on behalf of the person. So I know that that's been a sticking point in some instances, and we will continue to reinforce that message with the habilitation providers as well. And you can refer them to the training that will be posted online about staff action plans, where this point was certainly made during the course of the training process. So life plan agreement expectations, CCOs and care managers. CCOs need to establish and implement processes and training tools for addressing updates and corrections to the life plan to ensure the life plan comprehensively captures the person's needs and goals. So again, that's working on capacity building and creating consistency and systems of practice within the CCOs so that there's a way to manage if something is not being done as it is expected to be, and where issues need resolution, that you've got a good way to make those resolutions take place. CCOs need to have internal processes through the organization's chain of command to address life plan areas of disagreement if the care manager cannot resolve them themselves. So this is reinforcing those messages of the CCOs working with providers, working at the planning meeting process, and then moving it up the chain of command if there's a need to do that within the organization of the CCO, within the organization of the service provider. And then ultimately, if everything has been exhausted and there's no disagreement that can be obtained, and we know there'll probably be some situations like this, when that occurs, the DDRO can be a resource as a last resort to be consulted to help resolve the issues when something is just unresolvable through the normal course of systems that you've developed to resolve challenges and differences of opinion with regard to the life plan.
We have 10 minutes left. We have a question.
All right. So I'm going to go through these last slides pretty quickly because we are saving some time for questions. Actually, we're down to the last couple. Expectations for CCOs and care managers. CCOs need to ensure that care managers understand how to effectively facilitate a life plan meeting, including developing consensus about provider-assigned goals, frequency, and timeframes. Review and amend and prioritize IAM output, which we've talked about during the course of this presentation. CCOs should ensure that care managers are receiving proper training on person-centered planning and life plan development to develop a meaningful life plan for all individuals served. And we know you're getting a lot of training and that there's a lot of training under development, and you should feel empowered by that training to make sure that you're facilitating the kind of dialogue that we've been talking about through the course of this training. Standard operating protocols should be developed by the CCOs, and that's really, you know, these are new organizations merging from many existing care management agencies, and identifying consistent processes and protocols for resolving issues needs to be one of the clear goals of the CCOs so that everyone knows how to manage and respond to issues that emerge during the course of this transition period. And again, for providers, We expect that they're trained and attending life plan meetings and develop staff action plans, that there are processes for disagreement working through the care manager or the chain of command and involve the provider chain when necessary. Understand that everyone is experienced, and I just said this, a learning curve with the transition to an electronic person-centered service plan and health information technology. So, you know, we all need to be understanding of each other. There are changes occurring in the system. The use of the technology, while it is eventually going to be a real help to the system, it is a difficult transition to get everyone understanding it, get everyone used to it, making the right connections to the service providers. So it's something we need to understand and be sure that we're working to recognize that people may feel stressed by some of that, but not losing the goal of implementing and developing stronger practices and electronic systems to support those practices in our system. So remember, partnership, communication, and collaboration is the key. Successful development and implementation of the life plan is dependent upon, and the staff action plan is dependent upon the strength of the partnerships and communication. Coming to agreement on the provider-assigned goals and action steps is important during the life planning meeting, again. And the planning team needs to establish and develop the means of communication to ensure accurate and timely communication of the provider-assigned goals. So again, you don't want people leaving the room and then getting surprised 2 weeks later with something that's very different than what was discussed during that meeting. And with that, I'll stop talking and I will take some questions. We're going to mute for one moment while we take a look at the questions and make sure we're answering the most priority questions.
Okay, so there are quite a few questions that have come through the presentation about what care managers should do if providers are refusing to sign the life plan or do not think that they need to listen to what the person wants as far as their goals and supports and want to revert back to the old HAB plan.
Sure, thank you, Mary Ellen. So just a couple points. I think this presentation really covered the need for collaboration at a variety of levels and the need to move those issues up through your chain of command for resolution. By chain of command, I just mean supervisory chain, as well as the providers. And there might be a few different reasons for why people are saying no. And so I'm just going to go through a couple of those quickly. One might be technology issues. So if some of those early plans came over to the provider with things that don't look familiar to them or may even be somewhat inaccurate, there may be a hesitancy to sign the plan or to agree to the plan. In those instances, we've really worked hard to try to define and have direction to the CCOs that you all should have to help resolve some of those things, and we're in the process of developing a communication that will give some relief to providers during this transition period that's going to help relieve the tension for the whole system. So that will be happening soon. We've been communicating that to providers, so there should be a lessening of concern in some of those areas, but that's related to some of the terminology that stems from the technology issues. When there are issues related to the HAB goals and wanting to just back into the same old goals, again, you should be comfortable reinforcing that that's not in line with the person-centered goals that have been developed through the course of the life plan. And if that's an area, that's where you use your line of supervision to really work to address those areas, because this is a quality improvement focus, and you should feel empowered to say, you know, and I'm just going to use a simple example, someone's goal around tying their shoes for 10 years doesn't help them create relationships in the community. And if what they want is to create relationships in the community, tying your shoe is something that can be a support that's delivered to the person to keep them healthy and safe, and you need to find a way to develop habilitative supports that are helping them build the relationship in the community. So you should feel empowered to advocate in that way, and you should be supported by your supervisory chain and bring it up the provider chain if you're not getting that kind of response.
There's also lots of questions about time frames that we previously covered in the staff action plan training. The staff action plan training is on OPWDD's website under information for providers, care coordination, and information for providers. The webinar is out there. There's Q&As that are out there associated with connecting the dots training that I also encourage folks that are asking questions about time frames to take a look at. There's also a question about documenting efforts that care managers are going through in order to get agreement on the life plan.
Right. And there was a question just about what that agreement would look like.
Right.
Kind of
so the agreement on the life plan can look a lot of different ways, quite frankly. So we have as a vision for the future, once the health information technology system is fully implemented and available to people, that providers and families and the person receiving support, first and foremost, can go through a portal system, look at the plan, and acknowledge agreement to that plan. So that's eventually where we think the vast majority of acknowledgement and agreement will be documented. But that is not yet in place, so well, in every instance. So where it's not in place, you can have a verbal conversation and then document that conversation in your case notes and in your IT system notes. There can be an actual signed document that gets scanned and uploaded so that you have that in your records. But it's any form. It could be an email exchange that gets identified and documented. Any of those mechanisms for being able to identify that agreement has taken place are acceptable practices. The other thing I would say is we had a couple different examples over the last couple weeks where, 95% of the plan was agreed to, but there was one issue that was still somewhat unresolved. If that's the case, it shouldn't hold up the entire finalization of the plan, and it could be something, and it does depend on exactly what the issue is, but in some instances it may make sense to document in the narrative section of the life plan that there continues to be work towards resolving a particular interest or need of the person, and then agreeing to the rest of the 95% of the plan. So that shouldn't hold up the finalization of a life plan as long as it's documented where the areas of concern might be for additional resolution activities. And then the life plan can be updated when that resolution takes place. And that's normal planning processes that you're familiar with through ISP development as well. And I think those are really the major questions, and we're out of time. We do encourage you to, as Mary Ellen said, use the resources that are available online, use those documents, the question and answer documents, and we will continue to respond to the questions that we're getting and develop these next lunch and learn sessions consistent with where the trends are for additional information for care managers and for the system overall. So thank you very much for your time today, and have a good week, rest of the week.